If you are lucky, if you are making a team that you literally need a concave to join for AOD, that is BS. And you can take that from me, literally. I think that's absolute nonsense.
Sometimes the word elitist is justified, but sometimes discriminating against a certain player or an entire group of players based on one bad experience is not. In this video I'm going to talk about elitism, so when you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy. In gaming, elitists are people considered to be elite based on their skill and or wealth. In Runescape, this could apply to a player being able to achieve phenomenal PvM feats like a 4000% enraged telos kill, a very fast speed kill, or soloing a boss previously thought impossible to solo. You could argue that this is simply just a good player, and you'd be correct in saying so. I think the word elitist is often misused by players who simply view a good or toxic player instantly to be an elitist. However, you can be a toxic player without being an elitist, but you can also be an elitist without being toxic. Of course, there are players out there who fit into both of these descriptions. To understand elitism more, we need to categorize the different motives one might have to consider himself an elitist. Firstly, the sense of achievement. One might have fun attempting world records for, let's say, Arax or speed kills, or simply they want to be the best at Virago hard mode, or they just try and do things for the sense of achievement. They are hunting their goals to be the best of the best. Second of all, efficiency. Now this is probably the more apparent point because lots of these high level players want to be as efficient as possible, getting the most amount of kills per hour at a boss for example, or the most amount of things out of their time and money to maximize profits, but sometimes a slower kill with less prep time is actually more kills per hour, so that's something they should keep in mind, but that's what they go for, efficiency. The third point is simplicity and safety, and this is the most important point when talking about team bosses. If you're doing PvM with your usual high-level PvM group, you're used to that simplicity and safety and therefore less likely to take learners with you. Because faster kills often mean more than just efficiency for money per hour. It can also mean you use less food and therefore you have a different setup in your preset than if you were to take learners and you'd have to change that and all that stuff. It also means you could potentially ignore or even skip certain boss mechanics. This is apparent in group or team bosses like the bosses from the Elite Dungeons or Solak. I also think that this plays a large part in group PvM with teams or discords. You do not necessarily need the gear to get the boss kill, but it does provide a higher chance of you getting a successful kill and or bossing hour. I'm well aware that gear doesn't equal skill, but it is more probable that a person with high level gear will get you the kill. And this is more important the longer the boss fight is. Boss fights like Solak, Virago and Raids can take a long time to do, so failing a kill can be very annoying and frustrating for those other players in your team. The best example of this is Raids, as some groups often require T80 armor and T90 weapons. The best example of this is Raid FC. Now with my videos, I've proven that you don't even really need armor at raids, let alone high tier weapons. But it does make it easier, and if you don't know what you're doing, you definitely do need that gear and it will help you out. Again, gear does not equal skill. Skill is better than gear. But again, to be safe and have it go smoothly, they require you to have higher tier weapons and armor so that you have a higher chance of successfully killing the boss. Now I'm going to mention some points that aren't necessarily part of elitism. Saying toxic elitists is like saying blue car. Now the car might be blue, but that doesn't mean you have to be a car to be blue, nor does it mean every car is blue. Swap the word toxic with blue and the word car with elitist and you understand what I'm trying to say here. A player talking other players down for being bad at PvM doesn't make them an elitist per se. Sure, there are elitist players that do this, but there is a difference. You can also simply be a toxic player. Mentioning someone's mistakes in a non-destructive manner and then proceeding to help them is a much better way of treating another player and not being toxic. A player forcing a certain playstyle onto another player doesn't necessarily mean they are elitist. You can suggest a certain playstyle to someone, but you have to keep in mind that not everyone wants to play a certain way. Take full manual for example. Sure, full manual might objectively be better for that person, but if they're not willing to put in the effort for the extra control, it might not be the best way to go, and forcing that onto another player doesn't mean you're an elitist, but simply means again you're more of a toxic player and you cannot accept the fact that players play a different way or just choose their own way in playing a game. And sure, there are players out there that think their playstyle is the best, and you can explain why you think your keybinds, interface, or DPS rotation are objectively better than others, but keep in mind that it's still something rather subjective in the end. In fact, sometimes full manual can be worse for a player not willing to put in the effort than revolution, so there's no point in forcing it onto them. And the final big point is a player being intolerant of mistakes. Sure, this might largely be part of the elitist attitude leading towards safety and comfort when doing bosses, because they are used to do it in a certain way, but a player could also simply be rejecting people in their group for a good reason. For example, if they aren't willing to take up a role in raids. The player doesn't have to force it onto them, but they can reject them from the group because they aren't willing to learn or be part of a certain playstyle or tactic. And if you do end up taking that role or trying something new or trying a new playstyle and you end up failing because you're learning and practicing, that's totally fine. And if a player starts acting negative towards you if you are failing, they can just simply be toxic and they don't have to be an elitist. But they can be both. Now sadly, there aren't just toxic elitists, but there are also people who are anti-elitists. These are players that misunderstand the intentions of someone trying to help based on a bad experience they've had in the past. Now I'm going to take an example of what I've seen happen in my own Discord. Someone asked how to improve their melee DPS. One of my members of staff replied based on his gear and experience to switch from two-handed to dual-wield weapons. This is after asking him some questions, of course. To which he replies, annoyed, that he hates Switchcape and that he should stop forcing it onto him. Now what this person misunderstood is that the member of my staff suggested a thing with the objectively highest impact based on his gear experience and so on. Now whenever someone suggests anything in my Discord especially, it doesn't mean you have to do it. It's just a bit of advice. Whether you do it is up to you. And this wasn't the only case where this was a thing. This happens way more often. In fact, I've even seen it in my own YouTube comments. People telling me, why should I do it this way? Well, you don't have to. Or you don't need to switch to Ring of Vigor. You don't have to. It's completely up to you. But it does increase your DPS. That's a fact. Wait, am I an elitist now? Am I forcing things onto people? Most people draw a certain line for themselves, at which they argue, this is too much effort for me. This line is entirely subjective and shouldn't be projected onto other people. And it's even harder for people trying to give advice or make guides to predict that line for each person individually. If someone is trying to give you advice, simply listen and then determine if it's worth it for you to put the effort in to get better or do something differently. In the end, I think all players in RuneScape should simply treat each other with respect and common decency. Elitists do not have to be toxic, and learners shouldn't assume elitists are just toxic players. If you ask someone for advice, be mindful, listen, and make it clear in a friendly way that you do not wish to do certain things or put in the effort for certain things. On the other side, if you give someone advice, suggest the objectively best thing to do, depending on their gear, stats, whatever, but be respectful if someone doesn't want to do it and don't talk them down for not following your advice or playstyle. I truly think this is something players in any online game sometimes forget, and it really eats into how different the social experience could be. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. And don't forget, stay friendly.